Okay, picture this. It's Christmas Eve. You're walking down a cobblestone street in London. There's snow falling, maybe some roasting chestnuts, men in top hats, and just this general feeling of goodwill toward men. And standing in the center of it all is the man who practically invented that feeling, Charles Dickens.
It is the ultimate cozy image. The literary giant, the bearded patriarch, the man who wrote A Christmas Carol.
Exactly. But here's the thing, and this is why I wanted to do this deep dive today. That cozy, snowy image, it's basically a mask.
Oh, for sure.
If you actually look at the sources we've pulled together, the biographies, the medical journals, the legal history, the real Charles Dickens wasn't just a writer. He was arguably the Victorian equivalent of a global pop star, a medical pioneer, and a relentless social reformer who used fiction as a weapon.
Weapon is the right word.
Yeah.
He famously referred to his novels as a sledgehammer.
A sledgehammer.
Yeah. One intended to smash institutional abuses. He didn't just want to describe the world. He wanted to, break it and rebuild it.
And that's our mission for this deep dive. We are going to look past that whole classic author vibe to find a man who was fueled by a secret childhood trauma, who basically invented the concept of binge-watching stories way before streaming existed, and who had such insane powers of observation that he diagnosed medical conditions a century before doctors did.
And to understand that genius and that rage he carried, you really have to start with the secret he spent his entire life trying to hide.
The origin story. Because if you look at his birth in 1812, things look promising, right? I mean, he wasn't born into poverty.
Not initially. He was born in Portsmouth, but his early childhood in Chatham was actually, quite idyllic. He was reading voraciously things like Robinson Crusoe and the Arabian Nights.
Yeah.
His father, John Dickens, was a clerk in the Navy Pay Office. They had servants. They had respectability.
But his dad was a bit of a character.
Yeah, you could say that. John Dickens was the real-life inspiration for Mr. Micawber in David Copperfield.
Oh.
He was charming, optimistic, and just completely financially incompetent. He lived chronically beyond his means. And in 1824, the floor just fell out. John Dickens was arrested for debt.
And back then, debt wasn't just a bad credit score. It meant prison.
The Marshalsea prison, to be exact. And here's the part that feels so alien to us today. Under the laws of the time, the family didn't just wave goodbye. His wife, Elizabeth, and the younger children actually moved into the prison to live with him.
Wait, the whole family went to jail?
Everyone except 12-year-old Charles. He was considered old enough to work.
Oh, man.
So while his family sat in a prison cell, he was separated from them and sent to work at Warren's blacking warehouse at Hungerford Stairs.
Blacking sounds mysterious, but it's just shoe polish, right?
Toxic, smelly shoe polish. And this wasn't some summer job to build character. We're talking about a rat-infested, rotting building by the river.
And he was doing what?
He was pasting labels on pots of polish for 10 hours a day, 6 days a week.
For a kid who had been reading classics and dreaming of being a gentleman, that must have been a shock.
It was a humiliating descent into the working class. He felt utterly abandoned. He called himself a temporary orphan. He'd wander the streets of London alone, hungry, interacting with the very people he would later immortalize. The pickpockets, the street sweepers.
But the sources highlight this one specific moment that seems to have broken him, or at least scarred him forever. It's what happened when his dad got out.
This is the defining trauma of his life. Eventually, his father received an inheritance, a very Dickensian twist, and settled the debts.
So Charles was free.
He was released from the factory. He was ready to go back to school. But his mother, Elizabeth, argued against it.
She didn't want him to come home.
She wanted him to go back to the factory. She needed the 6 shillings a week.
Wow.
Dickens wrote later, "I never afterwards forgot, I never shall forget, I never can forget, that my mother was warm for my being sent back."
Warm for my being sent back. That is incredibly cold.
It created a lifelong resentment toward his mother. Critics and biographers argue this is why his female characters are often such extreme caricatures. Either these idealized, perfect angels who die young, or, grotesque, neglectful monsters.
Because he struggled to write complex women after that betrayal.
Exactly. The primary woman in his life had betrayed him.
But that time in the factory, as awful as it was, it gave him the ground truth, didn't it?
Absolutely. When he wrote about poverty later, he wasn't guessing. He wasn't looking down from some ivory tower. He knew what it felt like to be cold, to be hungry, and to be just another cog in the industrial machine.
So he takes that trauma and he eventually channels it into writing. But he doesn't just write books the way we think of them today. He completely disrupted the market.
He revolutionized the publishing industry. You have to understand, before Dickens, new novels were usually published as triple-deckers.
3 volumes.
3 volumes. They cost about 31 shillings.
Which, for a working-class person, is...
impossible. Completely out of reach. That was a week's wages for a skilled artisan. Reading new fiction was a luxury for the elite.
So Dickens comes along.
And he changes the game. He published in monthly installments, costing just 1 shilling.
1 shilling. So suddenly, the guy pasting labels on shoe polish pots can actually afford to read the story.
Exactly. It democratized reading. It created this shared national culture. The butcher, the judge, and the clerk were all reading the same story at the same time.
It really is the Netflix model, but even slower.
It was more like the Game of Thrones finale every single month. Yeah. It created a water cooler moment before water coolers existed. People would gather in groups to have the illiterate read to them.
I read about this.
There are accounts of crowds gathering at the docks in New York as the ship carrying the latest installment arrived, shouting to the sailors, "Is Little Nell dead?"
No way. They were shouting for spoilers from the boat.
They were desperate. And that format changed how he wrote. He utilized what psychologists now call the Zeigarnik effect.
The Zeigarnik effect sounds technical.
It's the psychological tendency to remember uncompleted tasks or stories better than completed ones. It keeps the brain active. Dickens mastered the cliffhanger.
Of course he did.
He would leave a character in mortal peril at the end of the month to ensure you came back with your shilling the next month.
And because he was writing it live, essentially he could change things on the fly, right? Like if the audience was bored, he could spice it up.
That is the most fascinating part of this serial revolution. It was interactive. The most famous example is his first novel, The Pickwick Papers.
Right, the one that made him a star.
Well, eventually. But at first, it was a total flop.
Really?
The first few installments sold about 500 copies. The publisher was thinking of canceling it. It was dying. So in the 4th installment, Dickens introduced a new character, a street-smart Cockney servant named Sam Weller.
And the audience liked him.
They loved him. Sales exploded from 500 to 40,000 copies almost overnight. Sam Weller saved the book and launched Dickens' career. It was a feedback loop. He wasn't just writing a book in isolation. He was conducting a live cultural event.
That is wild. Imagine if an author today could just rewrite the ending of a book because Twitter didn't like chapter 3.
In a way, he did exactly that. When he was writing Martin Chuzzlewit and sales were dipping, he abruptly sent the main character to America to satirize the United States, just to get people talking again.
He was chasing the ratings.
He was a showman. But, and this is the key pivot, he didn't just want to be famous. He wanted to be effective. Once he had this massive audience hooked, he decided, I'm not just going to entertain you, I'm going to change your mind.
This is the sledgehammer you mentioned, but how does that actually work? I mean, writing a sad story about an orphan is one thing, but actually changing the law? That seems like a stretch.
It wasn't a stretch for Dickens. You have to look at the context. Take Oliver Twist. It wasn't just a story about a sad boy. It was a direct attack on the new Poor Law of 1834.
What was the Poor Law?
The government at the time was obsessed with Malthusian ideas. Basically, the theory was that there were too many poor people, and if you helped them, they would just breed more surplus population.
Oh, that's grim.
So the government decided to make charity as painful as possible.
Starvation-based logic.
Exactly. The idea was to make the workhouse so awful, so degrading, that people would do literally anything to avoid it. They separated husbands and wives. They fed them gruel.
So when Dickens wrote that famous scene,
Oliver holding up his bowl and saying, "Please, sir, I want some more," that wasn't just drama. That was a political protest.
He was humanizing the statistic.
He was forcing the Victorian public to look at the human cost of their economic theories. He was saying, this isn't a surplus population. This is a hungry child. And it worked. It galvanized public opinion against the workhouse system.
He didn't stop with poverty, though. He went after the legal system, too. I've never read Bleak House. I've heard it's incredibly dense, but I know it's famous for the fog.
The fog is arguably the main character, but you have to read the fog as a metaphor. Bleak House attacks the Court of Chancery.
Which was a specific court.
It was a court designed to handle wills and trusts. But in reality, it was a nightmare. Cases would drag on for decades.
So Dickens centers the book on a fictional case.
Yeah, a case called Jarndyce and Jarndyce. It's a composite of several real cases. In the book, the case involves a massive inheritance. But the lawsuit drags on for so long that generations of the family are born, live in hope of the money, and die in despair.
And in the end, let me guess, The wrong person gets the money.
Worse. The case ends because the legal fees have used up the entire inheritance.
No, no.
The lawyers get everything. The family gets nothing.
That is brutal.
The fog symbolizes that moral and legal sclerosis, the confusion, the inability to see clearly, the way the system suffocates the people it's supposed to help.
And again, it wasn't just fiction.
No, Bleak House actually helped build the momentum for the Judicature Acts of the 1870s, which finally reformed that court system.
That is power. Writing a story that literally changes how the court works.
He did it again with Education in Hard Times. He attacked utilitarianism, the philosophy that only facts matter and that imagination should be crushed.
I remember the character Mr. Gradgrind. Now what I want is facts.
Precisely. Gradgrind treats children and workers, whom he calls the hands, as mere statistics. Dickens was arguing that if you strip away imagination and empathy, you don't get efficiency, you get cruelty.
It's amazing how relevant that still feels. We're so obsessed with data and metrics today. Dickens would probably have a field day with modern corporate culture.
He would likely see the Circumlocution Office from Little Dorrit, his satire of government bureaucracy, in many of our modern institutions. The office dedicated to how not to do it.
How not to do it. I love that. Okay, so we have the reformer. But here's where it gets really interesting for me. The guy was also observing things that science hadn't even caught up to yet.
This is one of the most surprising aspects of his legacy. We think of him as a storyteller, but he was a hyper-observer. He saw things others missed, and that included medical conditions.
You mean he diagnosed people in his books?
Effectively, yes. In the Pickwick Papers, he describes a minor character named Joe, the fat boy.
And Joe is, well, the name implies he's overweight, but what else?
Joe has very specific symptoms. He falls asleep constantly while knocking on a door while standing up. He snores loudly. He has a very red face. He has swelling in his legs or dropsy.
And for a long time, people just thought, oh, funny character, he sleeps a lot.
Right. It was played for laughs. But in 1956, 120 years after Dickens wrote, the book doctors published a paper naming a specific condition, Pickwickian syndrome.
They named it after the character.
They did. Today we call it obesity hypovolation syndrome. But Dickens had captured the symptoms, the daytime sleepiness, the polycythemia which causes the red face, the heart failure causing the swelling, so perfectly that the medical community acknowledged he beat them to it by a century.
That is mind-blowing. He didn't have an MRI or a lab coat. He just had his eyes.
It speaks to that ground truth we talked about. He watched people, he saw every twitch, every tick, and he applied that same microscopic observation to the way people sounded. He was a linguistic engineer.
You mean the names? I've always noticed his names are, well, they sound like the people they are describing.
They are aptonyms, names that fit the character's soul.
Like Scrooge.
Scrooge sounds like screw and gouge. They have that harsh, biting sound. Or Murdstone in David Copperfield.
Murder plus stone. Cold and deadly.
Exactly. Or Gradgrind. The name itself sounds like machinery crushing rock.
He was so good at it.
And then there's Mrs. Gamp from Martin Chuzzlewit. She carried this messy, baggy umbrella. She was so popular that in Victorian England, a baggy umbrella became known in the dictionary as a gamp.
He literally changed the dictionary.
He embedded his world into the English language.
So let's recap. He's a literary genius, a medical pioneer, a social reformer. He's famous. He goes to America in 1842, and he is treated like a rock star.
A rock star who hated the venue, perhaps. The 1842 tour was a frenzy. People snipped fur from his coat for souvenirs.
Oh, wow.
But Dickens was furious because America didn't have international copyright laws.
So they were pirating his books.
Rampantly. He called it robbery. He went there expecting a republic of liberty and found a place that stole his work and, even worse, maintained slavery. He was deeply disillusioned.
And this brings us to the part of the story that I think a lot of people don't know. We have this image of him as the family man, the Christmas guy.
Yeah.
But his private life was, well, messy is an understatement.
Messy is putting it mildly. The Victorian ideal of the hearth and home that Dickens championed in his books. It was a total facade in his own life.
He was married to Catherine Wright. They had 10 kids. So on the surface, it looks like the Cratchit family.
On the surface. But by the late 1850s, he was incredibly unhappy. He grew to resent Catherine. He felt she was intellectually inferior to him. He actually walled off a section of their house to avoid her.
He built a wall in the bedroom.
He blocked off the door. And in 1858, he did the unthinkable for the time. He separated from her.
And was public about it.
He published a letter in the newspaper explaining it, claiming it was mutual, while privately blaming her for everything.
And was there someone else?
There was. A young actress.
Who was she?
Her name was Ellen Ternan. Nellie.
And how old was she?
She was 18. Dickens was 45. She was the same age as his youngest daughter.
Oof. That's a tough look for the moral crusader.
It complicates the legacy enormously. He spent the rest of his life living a double life. He rented homes for her under false names. He traveled with her in secret. And this secret actually leads to one of the most cinematic moments of his life.
The train crash.
The Staplehurst rail crash in 1865. This is a crucial moment. Dickens was on a train coming back from France. He was with Ellen Ternan and her mother. The train derailed while crossing a viaduct.
This wasn't a fender bender.
No, this is a catastrophe. Several carriages fell off the bridge into the riverbed below. 10 people died. Dickens' carriage was the only one that didn't fall. It was left dangling off the edge of the bridge, suspended in the air.
That is terrifying.
He managed to climb out of the window, and true to his nature, he didn't run. He took his top hat, filled it with water, and went down to the wreckage to help the dying. He worked for hours among the bodies.
He was a hero.
He was. But then, right before he left the scene, he remembered something. He climbed back up into the dangling carriage.
Why? To get his wallet?
To retrieve the manuscript of our mutual friend. He couldn't leave the work behind.
Prioritizing the work until the very end, even over his own life.
Always. But he never really recovered from that crash. He lost his voice for a while, he had panic attacks, and yet he refused to stop working. In his final years, he embarked on these grueling reading tours.
I've read about these. He wasn't just reading, he was acting.
He was performing. And the most dangerous performance was the Sikes and Nancy scene from Oliver Twist.
The murder scene.
The Brutal Murder of Nancy by Bill Sikes. Dickens would perform this with terrifying intensity. He would shriek, he would growl, he would strangle the air.
Yeah.
There were reports of women in the audience fainting from the sheer horror of it.
And this wasn't good for his health.
It was suicidal. His doctors would measure his pulse before and after. It would skyrocket from 70 to 120 beats per minute. He was basically inducing a heart attack on stage night after night.
Why? Why do it if it was killing him?
He was addicted to the connection with the audience. He needed that validation. He needed to feel that he could still move people, still control their emotions.
And eventually his body just gave out.
It did. 5 years to the day after the train crash in 1870, he suffered a massive stroke at his home. He died the next day. He was only 58.
Leaving his final mystery, Edwin Drood, unfinished.
Exactly. The ultimate cliffhanger. We still don't know who killed Edwin Drood.
So, when we look back at him, the architect of the Victorian soul, what are we really looking at? Because he's not just the Christmas guy, and he's not just a hypocrite with a secret mistress.
No. He is the man who taught us how to see the modern world. He didn't just describe poverty. He framed it as a systemic failure, not a moral failing of the poor.
Right.
He taught us that sanitary reforms must precede all other social remedies.
Meaning you can't preach to people who are living in filth. You have to fix the system first.
Exactly. He believed that systemic delay, like the fog in Bleak House or the slow-moving courts, is actually a form of violence.
That is a heavy thought. Systemic delay is a form of violence.
It is. Think about someone waiting for life-saving medicine or a visa or a legal judgment while the paperwork sits on a desk. That delay destroys lives. Dickens saw that.
That's terrifying. It makes you look at a waiting room or a pending application differently. It's not just bureaucracy, it's a weapon.
It is. And that leads to the provocative question we should leave our listeners with. Dickens used his fiction as a sledgehammer to smash through the indifference of his age. He forced people to look at the workhouse, the prison, the slum.
And today, we have our own bureaucracies. We have our own inequalities. We definitely have our own circumlocution offices teaching us how not to do it.
We do. We are still living in the fog, he described. The question is, where is the voice today capable of delivering that sledgehammer blow? Who is taking the chaos of our world and turning it into a story so compelling that we can't look away? Because if Dickens showed us anything, it's that storytelling isn't just entertainment. It's the prerequisite for reform.
Something to think about next time you're binge watching your favorite show. Maybe we need less distraction and more sledgehammer.
Indeed.
Thanks for listening to this deep dive into Charles Dickens. We'll catch you on the next one.